Without immigration, the US working age population would have started declining as early as 2012. Net migration in 2025 is estimated to be between negative 10,000 and negative 300,000. This is the first time we've seen this in half a century that it has been negative, and this has created significant labor force constraints. So today we are covering the immigration imperative in the United States. We will be covering on immigration, historical review of the US and global immigration policy, why a declining fertility rate shines a spotlight on immigration specifically, and how the two are deeply linked. We're going to go over the risks of a zero immigration policy, what that would look like in a world where we shut our borders. We'll talk about immigrant contributions to our economic health and the common beliefs about immigrant crime. If you guys hear me cough a little bit, I got some sniffly kids at home. But in case we haven't gotten a chance to meet personally yet, my name is Nic DeAngelo. I am president of Saint Investment Group, and I am blessed and honored to be considered a thought leader in this space with real estate, with investing. I get to, talk on podcasts. I get to go on stages, but my favorite thing to talk about is economics and investment strategy, and that's what these webinars are for. We get to go all the way down the rabbit hole on amazing topics and look at them from new angles. But what I'm most proud of on this slide is what we've been able to do for investors. So we have over 600 mortgages that we've invested in over 29 states and growing, over 211 million in assets under management. Our fund, our Saint Income Fund, pays fixed returns up to 12 to 14.28% return. And the absolute thing I'm most proud of is that we have never missed a distribution to our investors, and that's been for over a decade. So very, very proud. That's a lot of hard work on our team's behalf. On my side, we are very focused on this, and we're proud of this slide. And this is more of the same. Over 131 months of consecutive distributions, over 14 million distributed to our investors, spread throughout the US, and over 600 mortgages. So it's been a fun road and a lot more ahead. But don't take my word for it. I always encourage you guys, if you wanted to see third-party reviews of investors, how they feel about their experience with Saint, there are two places above all else that you can find these. The first is going to be Trustpilot. We have dozens of reviews on there that you can check out where people have invested with us, left their experience of what that looked like, as well as Google. So if you spend some time on those, you'll get a good idea of what our happy investors have to say. I always like and encourage you guys to check out what other people are saying. And then a little more about us. I don't want to go too far without introducing our very own Tom Furlong. Tom is our head of investor success at Saint. So before we get going and jump into information on the topic today, Tom, can you hop in and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Saint?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Nic. So as Nic mentioned, I'm the director of investor success. Really, I'm working with pretty much everyone in the income fund. So we are going to go through a lot of information today. Nic's going to cover a lot. I'll be working behind the scenes. If you have any questions about the income fund, how we can get up to 14.28% returns passively, mailbox money, something you don't necessarily have to worry about, that's what I do. I'm going to drop my information in the chat. Here, I've raised just about now over 200 million over the last 8 years. And so happy to help, happy to be a resource. And we do a lot of great things here at Saint. I think the income fund is the absolute best. I don't know about, what do you think, Nic?
Oh, I'm biased, but that's why I say to go check out the reviews, because I think it's the best investment in this marketplace, bar none, no question, zero hesitation.
I think so too. So I dropped my information here in the chat. You can email, you can text or call. If you want to have a one-on-one conversation, I put my Calendly in there as well. But if you decide during this call that you want to make an investment, just ring me. I'll be available. I'll turn my camera off so I don't bother anyone here. And we are honored to have you as a partner in the income fund.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it as always, my friend. And guys, Like Tom said, he's available throughout. So you have his number there, you have his calendar there. You can fire in a call to him. If something's just burning a hole in your brain, you got to get to him. You can call him directly during this presentation, or you can book a call for a time that works best for you. So thanks again, Tom. We're going to kick things off. We're going to get into the immigration initiative here. And here's a quick outline for today. We'll start with a legal disclaimer. We'll keep our attorneys happy. Then we will go into our topic, a deep dive on U.S. immigration policies, what we're seeing, what the data shows. We'll wrap up with a little bit of housekeeping and then Q&A, live Q&A where you can ask any questions, whether it's related to the topic, on the economy, on the investment market that we're seeing, any of the above we love talking about. So we're happy to dive in with you guys in the live Q&A at the end. But before we get too far, we have something we like to call the Saint Book Club. And what this is this is a chance for us to, one, give away a free book every month. I'll tell you how in a second. And then two, it's to give back to our community a book that's been impactful, a book that we've covered, a book that the team's read. And this month's book is Economic Facts and Fallacies by Thomas Sowell. This book covers very heated topics, complex topics that, again, are something that he chooses economics over politics to describe solutions for. I love this book. I personally listen to it or read it probably at least once a year. It covers very, very dense topics that are very, very interesting. So I encourage you guys to take a look at this book, but we want to give it away to you. So if you want this book as a gift from us at the Saint team, we are asking you to engage today and to hop in. There are some ways that you can engage and get this book. Comments in the chat. We're going to go through a ton of data, a ton of perspectives here, so you can drop comments in the chat. Also, questions in the chat. Also, polls. We will likely drop polls throughout several times to get your guys' thoughts and votes on what you think key and crucial issues are here. And then last but not least, leaving us reviews. If this is helpful for you, we always want to get good feedback from you guys in review form as well. And if you're not able to join us for the full webinar tonight, we also just left the QR code for you because this is a good enough book that we encourage you to read it either way. But we want to give you away a free book. So if you drop, comments, questions, etc., in the chat, if you engage in the Q&A, there's a good chance you'll win a book tonight.
Quick point on the chat as well. You can actually, there's a drop down where you can either message just the hosts and panelists, you can just message us, or you can message everyone. So if there's something that you just want to drop Nick a note or Angie a note or myself a note and ask a question to us, great. If you want to make sure everyone sees it, you can hit that drop down and everyone can see it as well.
Great note, Tom. Great note. Yeah, and we want to see, if you're comfortable sharing with everybody, then everyone's a great option, and it sees the interaction with all of us. Good note, Tom. Thanks for jumping in. All right, let's keep the attorneys happy. Let's give you guys a little bit of an overview here. I encourage you to read the slide, but here are the big takeaways. This is not investment advice, the things we'll go through today. This is for educational purposes only. All investments carry risk. Past performance does not ensure future results. And then just a personal one, I do not a lot of numbers off the top of my head, especially in Q&A. So I encourage you guys to verify these numbers, as a lot of these will be pulled from memory. And then last but not least, we spent a lot of time on these to give you guys the best, most up-to-date, powerful information. So just a reminder that we own all the information here, and it lets us keep giving you guys great information along the way. So we encourage you guys to not take any of the data or information that we put together today. And a new one. We don't normally include this slide. I personally included this slide just because of the nature of this topic specifically. This is a touchy topic we're going through. Immigration in the US. A lot's going on. It's very personal for many people. Our goal today is to analyze objective data to identify better outcomes for the United States. That's the goal of tonight. The goal is to create a future for the US that allows our citizens to thrive, to have a high quality of life, and provides a brighter future to subsequent generations. Okay? I really want to be clear here on the goal. And then with the heavy note that this discussion is not meant at any time to suggest that one country, people, origin, etc., personal experience is superior to another. because we're going to be digging into a lot of data and a lot of things that are personal for a lot of people. So, I mean, this is a sensitive topic in my own home. My wife and I have a ton of immigrant family. The last name DeAngelo is not originally from the United States, right? We have immigrant grandparents, immigrant cousins. My godchildren are Israeli. My brother-in-laws are all three from born in different countries. So they are first generation immigrants. So it's very close for our home as well. But the goal here is that we're all very clear on that we want to lean into the data, we want to be objective, and that will take being clear on what we're going through. So let's kick things off, huh? Let's dig into immigration in the US. Today, we are going to explore US immigration policy, including both legal and illegal immigration flows. We're going to talk about demographic impacts. We're going to talk about economic contributions, social welfare utilization, and international comparisons to give us a good idea of both sides. This analysis, the goal for today, is to reveal the complex trade-offs that require careful policy consideration and demonstrate that immigration's effects are more nuanced than popular rhetoric, than what we see in the news or discussions on the news. Many public figures blame immigrants for economic and social problems in the US. We know that. That's a hot button topic, and they're easy targets with a lot of the complexity that goes into immigration today. Others dispute those beliefs, while they believe, or where they still others argue for a moral responsibility to continue offering a safe haven for the world's downtrodden. So first, we will look at why immigration policy is so important. Then we'll explore why it is such a hot button political issue and how we got here, a little bit on the history of what got immigration to the structure it is in today. So, the economic effect of immigration. According to a recent analysis of the National Academy of Sciences model, what we see is that immigrants generate nearly $1 trillion in taxes annually for the US. We also see that they receive roughly $700 billion in benefits. So a lot of benefits, but with a net fiscal contribution of roughly $300 billion from immigration in the US in 2024. And that's across federal, state, and local levels. So at all levels throughout the US. Reducing either legal or illegal immigration lowers GDP growth by roughly 0.4%. That is massive. 0.4% is a huge number when it comes to GDP growth in the roughly 1.5% to 2% range most years. So 0.4% would be brutal. Now, according to the Dallas Fed, the sharp immigration decline is already showing negative effects. Estimates suggest GDP growth in 2025 was 0.75 to 1 percentage point lower than it would have been under previous immigration projections. Highly selective, skills-focused immigration policies. I'm not going to be able to hammer that enough throughout. This is a big deal. Highly selective, skills-focused immigration policies can theoretically capture innovation benefits while minimizing short-term wage competition. However, the evidence suggests that even relatively open policies also typically commonly produce net economic benefits. Immigrants typically fill labor shortages. They create complementaries with native workers. They expand consumer demand, right? They spend the money that they make here. And all in all, many immigrants, especially in great programs, drive innovation at rates higher than their population share. These are all good things. But remember, this is all based on the assumption that the immigrants are entering the workforce at high rates of employment. When this is the case, we see that immigrants create major benefits to their new country. The Congressional Budget Office estimates 7.3 million foreign nationals illegally or with partial authorization became residents from 2021 to 2024. The Dallas Fed also estimates that the adverse impact on GDP growth that will result from significantly lower immigration at roughly 0.5% to 1.5% by 2027. So making smart decisions here with our immigration policy has huge swings for our GDP that benefit all of us as US citizens today. What this tells us is that immigration is important to the economic health of the United States, and it boosts our GDP, which improves economy, the economy, outcomes, and quality of life for everyone living in the US. We also see, I'm very proud of this statistic. We also see that 40% of Fortune 500 companies are founded by immigrants. This is the true American dream. Working hard in a country that celebrates success. The immigrant work ethic is a powerful driver when we create a structure that channels that hard work into our economy. So, we just covered all the overall immigration outlook, the big federal level, the big picture. And overall, it's actually quite positive. There's a lot of data that we'll go into on that as well. And as we get into it later, this positive ROI on immigration is something we need to reinforce because it will lead to positive outcomes in 5, 10, 70 years down the road for the US. And as I mentioned a little while ago, I also, and just to make a point here, I do not hold the belief that the US owes the rest of the world immigration status to our country. I don't think that's something that we show up every day and that every immigrant on every country that wants to be in the US should be here. I think we need a more thoughtful approach. But I do believe that nearly every American citizen should be adding value to the system also, whether they're foreign born or national born. And much of the overall data is positive that immigration is a major net positive for the US economy. So in this slide, we go over some of the big questions. We went through some of the big picture data, but what are the individual questions that this data brings? So immigration data questions. Do all immigrant groups contribute equally? Does the US even track this data at that level? What should the golden metric be for immigration? Do some origin countries have better outcomes than others once they become immigrants in other countries? Are there trends behind what origin countries achieve this and which ones do not? Then we can go into things like origin country education versus employment versus ROI. And so if we have all this data and we can chop through it, what do we do about it? That's really the end question. We can go through all the data in the world, but how do we apply this to a thoughtful, positive immigration structure? So first, let's answer the first question. Let's start at the start, right? What is the golden metric for measuring immigration? For me personally, digging into the data, I consider the number one metric for immigration to be net contribution by origin country. Which country's immigrants contribute the most to the United States? That to me is the most important metric I'm always looking at when I see immigration debates on the news, because it cuts through the noise and it gets to the data. Why? Because we know that not all countries' immigrants have equal contribution and have equal outcomes when they go to a different country. Whether that's cultural, whether that's education, whatever it is, we can dig into that. But first, we need to identify what the net contribution is. There's a multitude of factors here, right? Education, culture, skills. But the most important thing above all else is which countries add value to the system. Because if we know which countries have immigrants that contribute, then we can evaluate how to make a thoughtful immigration policy around that. But next, let's answer the next question, which is if this data is even tracked by the United States. Because without this data, we couldn't even come to helpful connections in conclusions anyway. The reality is this data is not accurately tracked by the United States. We do not have detailed tracked information of what immigrants from which origin countries produce net positive results in the United States. So the next question is, why don't we have that? I actually don't know. Because here's what we do know is that many European countries track this data in super fine detail. They take the extra step and they want to know which countries have different outcomes when they immigrate to that respective country. So the best and most detailed data that I personally found was the country of Denmark. So we'll look at some of their example data sets to give a baseline of what their findings are, because they're a Western country that's most similar to ours in the world. And then we'll also look at this data to understand what I believe should be tracked in the United States if we're committed to creating a comprehensive and beneficial immigration policy. So in this chart, this is from Denmark. I want to absolutely put a fine point in that. But what it shows simply is the golden metric. Which origin countries' immigrants contribute the most to Denmark? So Tom, I see your question. This is a fantastic question. This is how much they pay in taxes minus how much they receive from social benefits, social programs, etc. So you answered it in the question, but just to reiterate exactly what you already said here. What we see in this chart for Denmark is that the most contributing countries to this system are going to be here, let me get to the data here. Great Britain, highest outcome. USA, Indonesia, etc. We also see the lowest contributing on the left end of the spectrum here. We see that these are deeply negative, actually, right? They cost the country a lot more than they add to from a benefits and a taxes paid perspective. Again, these are on average. These are not individual people. This is an on average from origin country. So I don't highlight these countries to be nasty here. I'm making a point to highlight them because they'll become more important in a second as we dig into the data. Now, we know that different countries have different economic contributions to the government. All of the European country data show this. So let's start with the baseline data. How much origin country immigrants contribute versus their employment rate. How much origin country immigrants contribute versus their employment rate. This one seems so extremely obvious because if they're not working, how can they contribute financially to their new country, right? What we see in the chart in Denmark is that the more employed they are, the more they contribute. It's pretty simple. It's from left to right and it's up and to the right. We see that natural-born Danish citizens are roughly 85% employed, followed by the Netherlands, Thai, India, Philippines, etc. These employment rates correlate very strongly to the first chart of regions and countries whose immigrants are net contributors. Let's go back. The same people that are highly employed are typically the same origin countries that contribute the most. So now we see that a pretty detailed example that employment is one major variable for immigrants being a net contributor or not. We also see the least employed origin countries are Lebanon, Somalia, Iraq, and Syria. So what do we see on the net contribution chart for these countries? We see the same countries on the negative net contribution side of the equation. So what we see is that the least employed countries also are the ones that contribute the least. They contribute the least and actually are extremely negative, meaning they receive more government funding than they contribute. So if we wanted to improve U.S. immigration policy, we would first need to be tracking this data with more diligence. We do not track this to the same degree in the U.S., and we don't have good data to make good decisions with. And next, we need to be committed to incentivizing employment by immigrants, structures that incentivize them to work in the country, because this has positive outcomes for their contribution once they're in. The low contribution countries, we see less than 50% employment. On the high side, we see 75, 80, 85% employment. These are huge swings. So incentivizing employment is a key factor here when we look at immigration policy. Next, I would say that, average IQ is on one end of this. I look at this more as education when you dig into some of the numbers. So education systems of origin countries versus immigrant income. We know this is the case in the US, right? We know that higher education typically leads to higher incomes. So it appears the same here. So once we can actually track some of the detailed data, we can start to peel back layers. What we see is that Denmark has already done this. And what they found is that one of the biggest trends is the origin countries' average IQ, which is equivalent mostly to educational systems. We also see outliers across the board that don't follow the trend as much. There are more questions than answers on those, but we see Latvians and Australians outperforming their peers despite being in the same IQ range. So if we were going to be doing thoughtful immigration policy, there are countries on here that clearly have higher incomes and that clearly have a huge amount of positive education from their origin countries. This is interesting. The big takeaway should be two things here after going through a few of these charts. The US should be tracking this data, and we are not. We are not tracking this data. And the next is once we have this data, we can apply it in ways that create thoughtful immigration to identify who would contribute more to the country on average. This is how you apply data in strategic ways to make better policies. So there are ways to manage immigration that are better and ways to manage it that are worse. So what happens if we reduce immigration overall? What if we knocked everything off the table and just shut our borders? Here's where it gets interesting and also a little bit stark. Without immigration, the US working age population would have started declining as early as 2012. Net migration in 2025 is estimated to be between negative 10,000 and negative 300,000. This is the first time we've seen this in half a century that it has been negative, and this has created significant labor force constraints. When we see negative immigration to the US, when we see a population decline, what we typically see are things like slow GDP growth, tighter labor markets, accelerated increase in old age dependency ratios. If you want examples of that particular point, check out much of Asia. We'll go into that in a little bit, but it's a stark, difficult to tackle problem once we start getting into that structure. We see fiscal pressures, higher deficits, slower innovations, and sector-specific labor disruptions. Think about agriculture. Think about construction. Think about hospitality, food processing, et cetera, that are hugely immigrant-driven workforces. And then this is just a quick reference chart so that we see how many immigrants are distributed throughout the US by percentile. We see that California, Texas, Florida, and New York are the highest immigrant destinations by far. Those four states combined represent over 50% of the, illegal, unauthorized, undocumented immigrants since 2023. Excuse me, as of mid 2023, so several years ago. This is the most updated data we have on a widespread immigration breakdown. So how did we get here? How did we get here? We know where we're at today. We know what other countries are tracking, but how did we in the US get here? Here's the last handful of presidents to see what their US net migration was per year. At the peak of 2023 and 2024, that immigration surged during that period of time. Annual immigration reached nearly 3 million people. The majority of these immigrants were illegal or undocumented during that period. There were 14 million undocumented immigrants living in the US in 2023. 60% of those who entered in the US in 2021 did so without legal authorization. So they were illegal or undocumented. Things have changed drastically since 2025. For the first time in at least 50 years, more immigrants have left the U.S. in 2025 than entered. Economists at the Brookings Institute estimate that net U.S. migration in 2025 at between negative 10,000 and negative 300,000. Arrests and deportations account for a small portion of the change, but the biggest part of the reduction is due to fewer immigrants coming to the U.S. The U.S.-Mexico border is virtually closed at this point with a lot of Trump's immigration policies and crackdowns. While, as always, different estimates claim higher and lower numbers, most agree that the result is a negative net outmigration for 2025 with an even larger gap in 2026. This is a good slide with a good breakdown. The Trump administration has not published a specific numeric target for reducing legal immigration, but its leaders describe a central goal of restricting both legal and illegal migration more than any prior administration. The Trump administration's policies, things like ending visa programs, revoking temporary statuses, adding massive fees, and tightening eligibility. These are all consistent with a large de facto reduction in legal inflows over time also, which is a big point here. A few examples. In December 2025, President Trump directed DHS and the State Department to pause the diversity immigrant visa. This affected roughly 50,000 immigrant visas per year. Also, we saw March 2025, around 1.3 million people held TPS across 17 countries. Okay, so we're talking millions of people that are deeply affected and that, really stalling legal immigration, which is a big deal. which is a big deal. Approximately 250,000 newborns each year would not receive citizenship under these shifts, which would mean that many American citizens would not have their children, or excuse me, which means that many American citizens would not have their own children being considered U.S. citizens as well. So this even impacts U.S. citizens with some of these policy changes. That's an interesting note at this stage. And just this month, the Trump administration paused visa processing for approximately 80 countries. What we saw here was a stated goal of eliminating applicants that were most likely to rely on U.S. social welfare benefits. The new actions seemed related to, the fraud Minnesota was referenced multiple times that, at the end of the day, a messy situation. What we're seeing is that the new actions under this administration on the specifically around social welfare benefits are primarily targeting Somali descent immigrants. Now, I'm sure we all have seen at this point, many of the Somali daycare videos. I've done research on my own, and where I stand on it and where I've left off is that this fraud, if it's this alleged fraud, should absolutely be investigated. If it's a reality and the fraud is real, it should be punished harshly. I think extremely harshly. And if it's not real, or if it's deemed to be not fraud, then I think that needs to be publicized as well. I think this needs to be out in the open, so American citizens can see the truth on either end that this lands. But what legal methods of immigration remain with a lot of the changes that we're seeing today? The H-1B visa. I'll let you guys take a look here while I grab a sip of water. In my opinion, the H-1B visa is one of the biggest opportunities for the United States. The H-1B program does remain intact today, but there's something interesting that's changed. There's a new $100,000 charge, but in addition to, the H-1B application process is now is currently requiring a bona fide U.S. job that genuinely needs at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field. It also requires a worker who has that degree or equivalent in the same field and a U.S. employer willing to pay the prevailing wage with a clear labor condition attestation, and that the applicant win a slot in the annual H-1B lottery. In a typical year in the U.S., we see roughly 150,000 new H-1B workers start employment out of about 400,000 total approvals. This is roughly for each year. The new $100,000 fee applies to most of these new hires and is so large that economists and industry analysts expect it to eliminate a majority of routine H-1B hiring from abroad. What this leaves is only a small number of ultra high wage segments while shrinking the overall pipeline of high skilled legal immigrants. What we also see is that technology companies are the most reliant on these visas consistently. Companies like Amazon, like Meta, Microsoft, Google, these are actually the top 4 companies with approved new H-1B visa petitions for 2025. This is the first time that U.S. tech companies have held the top 4 spots. So this represents a significant shift from previous years where Indian IT service companies really kind of dominated the H-1B market. Analysts believe that in many cases, employers will pivot to outsourcing crucial tech work to other countries rather than pay the new fee. That is all bad. That is all bad. We want to keep the high skilled labor here. We want to keep the brain power coming to the United States. This, what we see, if that goes overseas, this is called brain drain, and this will reduce the innovation and the drive that have led so many different people and different companies started by immigrants, as well as the patents that they create and pursue here. Remember when we discussed net contributors to the economy, right? 2 major variables. There was 2 standouts. One was employment participation rate, and the other was the education of the immigrant. The H-1B program checks both of these boxes dramatically and enthusiastically. This additional $100,000 hurdle being added to H-1B visas is one of the biggest issues I have with current immigration policies. We need more immigrants in the US, and we want them to be net contributors to the US economy. The H1 program, the H1B program is this policy in a nutshell. The economics over politics approach here would be to reduce hurdles to this program, to remove the $100,000 visa requirement, and increase the thresholds of how many H1Bs are brought into the US. The reality is, let's maximize our opportunities when we are given them. People want to come here with high skills that want to work. Let's give them an opportunity. So let's take a look at some historical shifts in immigration policy. Let's look at the history here a little bit. As we all know, the United States was built as a country of immigrants, a proud melting pot of strivers and hard workers that came from across the globe. There were very few restrictions early on immigration until the 1924 Immigration Act drastically reduced immigration, limiting primarily to immigrants of Northern and Western Europe. By 1965, the immigration policy was viewed as racist and incompatible with the growing civil rights movement. So there was a growing shift supporting family reunification, targeting of needed skills. Targeting needed skills seems pretty strategic for the US economy, right? Just a note there. In 1965, a cap of 270,000 people for the Eastern Hemisphere and 120,000 for the Western Hemisphere was established. The Eastern and Western maximums were combined in 1978 and reduced to 270,000 in 1980. The previous policies had not restricted immigration from Latin America, but the new cap system, combined with the elimination of the Bracero guest worker program, which had provided access for 450,000 temporary workers from Mexico, created a shortage of opportunities and led to the beginning of unauthorized immigration. That right there, the elimination of the Bracero guest worker program, is what started the massive illegal trend in immigration into the United States, which peaked in 2008. This is back to supply and demand basics. There was a high demand for labor, and there was a shortage of supply. So the incentive became to come over the border illegally to take the opportunity of those much needed jobs. Those jobs also paid more than Mexico. So there was an incentive for the Mexican workers to take the risk with the higher opportunity. And we needed the workers in the US at that time. So the immigration policies were not matching economic realities. Tom, great question. The Bracero guest worker program, I don't have an exact year for that. I'll pull it up. Leslie, if you...
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, that was part of the 1965. No. Sorry, that was part of the. I don't know. Let me check. I thought it was part of the 1965, but it may have been 1978.
Yeah, okay. And we'll dig in. And by the way, if you stump Leslie, Tom, that's actually pretty impressive because she is a genius. So on that side. But here's just to drill back in. Today, we can identify our economic and labor needs in the US. We know what these numbers are. If these needs could be met through policy instead of a strategic open border approach, or instead of a non-strategic open border approach, we can start shifting our immigration system back to a system that is managed, organized, and balanced. So let's get back to the economic numbers here, and let's spend less time on the political rhetoric that is all over the news. Let's balance the economy with strategic immigration rather than, a shot in the dark and open borders. So this is where it starts to get interesting, guys. Why are immigration rates so important? Even as the US population has grown over time, US fertility rates have actually been falling. The total fertility rate in the US is projected to be around 1.5 births per woman in 2026. And it's expected to decline to 1.53 by 2035. The replacement rate for children, for a fertility rate, is 2.1 children per woman. And the US has been below that level since 2007. During the baby boom, for reference, the fertility rate was 3.65 per woman, which led to a huge population boom. So how has the US population risen from 76 million people in 1900 to over 341 million people today? It's simple. Immigration. Ooh, we got a poll for you guys too. We got a poll for you guys. So here's a poll. We'd love to hear from y'all. To maintain a stable population without any immigration, what is the average number of children an American woman would need to have? I'll give you guys a second. Smart audience. You guys are good listeners. You guys are on this data. You guys nailed it. 2.11 is the break-even fertility rate for a population for kids per woman, for kids per adult woman. And drop this in. The US is currently roughly 1.7 to 1.8, meaning we are mathematically dependent on immigration to avoid a population crash. We'll go into population crashes in a minute here. But again, Asia is the brutal example to take a look at. So we see that immigration is not just a core strategy of stabilizing our demographics, but it's also a core strategy of US economy and GDP growth as we get to later generations. And the reverse is also true. A declining population has massive issues. So let's take a look at some of those now. Without immigration, and with the declining population, the U.S. faces population decline beginning in the coming decades, severe labor force contractions, potential GDP contractions and productivity declines, accelerated aging of the population. That's tough. Think about the US, huge baby boomer population, right? Most moving towards no longer being in the workforce or reduced in the workforce, with smaller generations filling in behind them. That's less people to help support a larger generation. It's very expensive. And you look at Asian countries, Korea, South Korea, China, et cetera, they're having a hard time with that, managing that and balancing that. We also see increased government debt and spending, less of a tax base, less people paying taxes, more people on government services and getting government support. We also see a potential for deflation of our currency, which is the only thing worse than inflation. If you've joined us before, you've heard me beat up inflation infinitely, but deflation is no question worse than inflation for a number of reasons. We also see a labor force impact. Foreign-born workers make up 19.2% of the U.S. workforce in 2024. That is the highest share since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began tracking in 1996. Negative impacts include funding for Social Security, Medicare, private pensions, etc., all of which rely on younger workers to support the needs of the aging. Population declines can have outsized impacts on small towns. This can leave them without enough people or tax revenues to even support the local schools and infrastructures. And here's a good comparison of fertility rates in the US versus other countries. So you can see where we fare versus the rest of the world. You can see our friends in Europe, even if we're in a little spat right now at times. You can see that many of them are even lower than we are. And then you see the Asian countries, South Korea, you see Japan, you see China getting crushed, South Korea getting crushed. We're talking about generations being halved by generation. These are huge. I mean, these are brutal numbers to see coming through. Out of the 10 countries with the lowest birth rates globally, 6 are East Asian nations. Despite significant economic development and government baby bonus programs, meaning they're even incentivizing people to have more kids, these countries cannot reverse fertility declines. Here's an off-the-cuff statistic as I was reading a lot of this. I believe the statistic is there has never been a country that's recovered from dropping below the 1.3 fertility rate threshold. So if you look here, Italy, even though I have a lot of love for that country, even though I have a lot of family there, they are in major dire straits demographically. Look at the East Asian countries. Look at Spain. The European Union as a whole is about to drop below 1.3. So what's Europe doing about it? What Europe is doing, take a look at Spain. They actually had a population growth of 525,000 in 2024. Why? Because that was primarily driven by immigration policy. Germany, 2024, population growth of 330,000. 330,000. There we go. Largely immigration driven. France, population growth, 230,000. Immigration driven. Europe's immigration is managed through the EU framework and is less characterized by illegal immigration. We see a lot more in the US, but we do see that the scale and dynamics are different in the US. In the last 2 years, illegal entries to the EU have actually fallen. So this is interesting. I really like comparing the data so we know exactly where we stand on a global basis. So here's some good notes by some highlighted countries. What we see is that the IMF notes that countries like Italy, Japan, and Germany are already experiencing the effects of demographic decline. Smaller working age populations, higher old age dependency, increased pressure on pensions and healthcare systems, worries about long run productivity and growth overall, likely backslides for many of these, very first world, first tier, previously amazing, thriving economies. They now have growth concerns. These are big issues, and they're ones that compound over time. So Europe is leaning more heavily towards immigration to solve these problems, and frankly, taking a page out of the US's book here, because we have a long history of good, solid immigration rates into the US. Earlier, we discussed some of the vital contributions that immigrants make to the US economy. Let's take a closer look at why, and let's compare legal versus illegal immigrants and their impacts on the US. A little side-by-side comparison. Make it a little easier for you. In 2024, about 41% of new adult immigrants had no education beyond high school. We're talking roughly, 40, 2 out of 5 that had no education beyond high school. On the other hand, roughly 41% held a bachelor's degree or higher. So 2 out of 5 had upper education, higher education. However, there are significant regional differences, with over half of working age immigrants to California specifically having at least a bachelor's degree. About 1.7 million undocumented adults in the United States with at least a bachelor's degree are working in jobs that do not match their education. What we see is that further, when employers hire immigrants, they often do so to fill critical positions that enable them to expand operations and actually hire more workers. It's part of an expansion push for these companies. This includes US-born workers. So, for example, if a chip manufacturer is able to hire more highly specialized computer scientists from abroad, they can expand overall operations and hire more US-born workers like technicians, sales, accounting, and other roles. Research identifies wage gains of 5 to 15% for immigrants who gain legal status. The legal status here is the big takeaway. What we see is that there's 3 mechanisms that this occurs. Increased incentive to invest in human capital. So more education for legal immigrants. This is good. This is boosting the brain power of the US economy. 2, we see greater willingness to pursue training in US specific skills. This is good. This is roots in the US. This is them buying into the system and investing in it. And then 3, increased tax paying ability. Right? As their productivity and their wages rise, they are paying more taxes. This is good. This is the net contributor status that we are looking for from immigrants into the US or really any country. The Congressional Budget Office found that wage increases associated with legal status generate a net increase in government revenues, not a net cost. So the goal here is to incentivize and direct and create systems for legal immigration, because it has a net gain and net positive gain throughout the economy. And they're able to set roots into local economies. They're able to buy homes. They're able to do things here. They make more money and they pay more taxes. All are positive. So Here's an interesting policy. Let's go back in time a little bit. The 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act created the structure that both parties lean on today. What we saw is that tougher border and workplace rules in return for status of long-term residents. What we saw is emphasis on employer verification. So now the emphasis is on the employers to verify the legal status of their employees. We also saw that continuing debate over whether to pair enforcement with new legal worker programs or just one-time amnesty. What we're looking at here is the Reagan administration's program that granted amnesty to over 4 million immigrants eventually. This did not solve illegal immigration, right? We're still talking about it many years later, but it did give legal status to millions that had been already working in the United States positively. So how have other nations handled immigration? Across wealthy countries, immigration demand shows up as people applying to come to the nation legally. We also see that as those actually admitted, and then 3, people arriving illegally, just going directly in. The US has by far the largest illegal undocumented flows, while Canada and Australia run tightly managed legal programs. They also see that they have relatively small unauthorized illegal streams with these tightly managed legal programs. So the better the system is and the more streamlined it is, the less illegal or unauthorized immigration that these countries are seeing. What we see is that the EU sits somewhere in the middle. They have a high asylum pressure to take in asylum seekers, but also have much lower illegal numbers than the US has. The US has the largest illegal immigration inflows and asylum backlogs among rich nations in the world. We see that net migration in 2022 to 2024 was driven heavily by unauthorized, undocumented entries. Canada and Australia, this is a good point. This is one of my favorites. Canada and Australia absorb high legal immigration per capita via planned, skill-oriented programs. This allows them to have relatively small illegal streams of immigrants. Canada uses a ranking system to pick skilled workers for permanent residence. What they do is they take prospective immigrants, they create an online profile, which is then assigned a score. So they have a score-based system. Points are awarded for factors like age, education, proficiency in English, Canadian work experiences. They also can add points by having spouses that also earn points for the same factors. Transferable skills also add to points totals, just as having a Canadian job offer does, having previous residence and family residence there. All of that sounds really reasonable. I'm going to be honest. Let's give Canada the W on this one. If we're looking at systems like a scoring system, this could be massive. This could massively improve US immigration approvals. And it can make sure that we get the quality immigrants we have to have with the factors that we determine beforehand. The EU, on the other hand, faces substantial asylum demand and politicized illegal immigration routes, but they also see fewer illegal immigrants than the United States on the southern border alone, actually. So let's go over some takeaways here. If we're looking at economics over politics, what we see is that using a system that matches Canada's on a per capita basis would substantially increase the flow of legal immigrants to the United States. With our national fertility level below replacement levels, we cannot afford to reduce population growth with an excessive constraint on legal immigration. Implementing stable enforcement through border control and employer compliance requires reducing the cost and the crisis mentality and political volatility of the issue. A policy that slashes both legal and illegal immigration doesn't just trim headcount. It shrinks the future tax base. It accelerates aging. It constrains growth, and it undermines innovation while often failing to eliminate illegal immigration anyways. The net result is smaller, older, slower growing US populations with more fiscal and more political risk, the opposite of what the long-term horizon investors generally want. And if we're looking at specific policy changes, there are a few steps that we can take to make this system at a forward-looking, sustainable, and beneficial system for both U.S. citizens and still providing opportunities for immigrants to flourish in the U.S. One, track data. We do not have data that's up to par with the rest of the world. We need to understand what net contribution looks like by origin country in the United States. We need legal immigration reform in the US. We need fast time frames. We need prioritizing net contributor countries. We need to prioritize applicants' education and skills. We need the caps increased so we can have better, more skilled immigrants into the country. We shouldn't be slowing these processes down. We should be supporting these processes. Illegal immigration should be enforced because that pushes immigrants towards the legal system. We want to be able to manage the system, not on an open border basis, but on something like Canada's, where it's a scoring system for what we decide is important. And then last, consistency. I think this has been one of the biggest issues consistently throughout U.S. immigration policy in the last several decades, is it's inconsistent. One day it's open borders, one day it's H-1Bs, then we have fees, we have closed borders. It's too inconsistent for an immigrant population that wants to add value to the United States. With these changes, the U.S. can take advantage of an opportunity while the world goes through some major changes. All that said, I fully believe the U.S. remains the economic powerhouse. We are the number one leader in numerous key industries, and we still are the reserve currency holder. Acknowledging these benefits, we need to think as a country proactively about how the world will look down the road and create policies today to be on the right side of history. We have more opportunity and a better outlook than we anywhere else in the world, but we need to be evolving strategically to keep this advantage. Today, all eyes are on the US, even at Davos, right? And we are still holding the cards. But we also need to create immigration structures that meet our needs and give immigrants opportunities to add value to our amazing country. So with that said, the number one thing on a takeaway from an investment level is to understand there are massive changes going on in the US economy. We have a huge opportunity to lean into immigration. Both sides can meet across the aisle and be shaking hands on this. But in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of chaos and changes, our goal at Saint is always the same. We have something that we call the all seasons portfolio. It's a concept for leaning into the investments that are thinking in the future, that are forward thinking. What we see as the number one opportunity in today's market, bar none, are single family mortgages. The single family home market is unquestionably the most robust asset class in real estate today. So what we do to take advantage of that marketplace is we invest in mortgages. We buy mortgages on single family homes in bulk that are non-performing. We buy them at a discount and we get those mortgages back and performing. We keep those families in their homes and they pay us income. They pay us a consistent mortgage payment, which we then turn around and share with our investors. We find this as the number one opportunity to implement an all seasons approach to today's market. One thing I personally like about it is rates. Rates are constantly in the news. There's constantly a discussion on rates. What I love about the single family home market, particularly with mortgages, is that if rates go up and if rates go down, we are solidified in a great way. In the case that rates go up, mortgages are more stable. People are less likely to refinance, which means the cash flow and the monthly payments are more stabilized, meaning there's less turnover in the portfolio. And the reverse is also true. If rates go down, it stimulates buying. The value of homes typically goes up, which means there's more equity for borrowers, more equity for homeowners. This stimulates more investment. We also see returns go up because refinances go up. In the case that a refinance occurs, we get paid 100% upfront. They pay us the entire balance at one time. On our end, it's pretty simple. We just reinvest that into more mortgages and grow the portfolio. So I love this approach in today's market because it's rate agnostic. If rates go up, we're happy. If rates go down, we're happy. So if you want to learn what we're doing at Saint and our investment strategy through these economic changes, through the things that we just covered, I highly encourage you to book a call with Tom. You can scan the QR code on the screen. You can text that number to connect with Tom as well, or you can book a call with Tom at the link that he provided earlier. Andrew, Tom, can you drop that link one more time so everybody has access to that? Oh, there we go. Let's see. There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Tom. So with that said, we'll start shifting into gear here for the Q&A. But before, last note is, if you enjoyed this webinar, we do these deep dives on economic topics every single month. We have a huge repository of different topics that are extremely interesting in the same vein of what we covered here. We have topics ranging from the 2026 playbook, where we go through an entire market breakdown of what we're seeing, what the big analysts are finding, et cetera. We have the mortgage investing masterclass that goes through in detail how to invest in mortgages and what to be doing on that side. We have deep dives on the stock market, going into deep data of what that looks like and what the economic projections are. I encourage you guys to check out our YouTube channel. It's all free. We're already doing this analysis anyway. We're already deep diving on these topics anyway. So we put these webinars together because these are topics we're already researching on our end. So check out our webinars if you found on our webinars on our YouTube. If you found this helpful, I think it'll be really beneficial for you.